In a quiet little town nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there stood a modest karate dojo. The building wasn't much to look at from the outside. Its walls were painted a faded white, and the wooden sign above the door simply read, Harris Karate Dojo. But inside it buzzed with energy. Every evening, students of all ages gathered to practice punches, kicks, and blocks under the watchful eye of Coach Harris, a stern man in his late 40s who took pride in running one of the strictest martial arts schools around. Among these students was Emily Carter, a shy but determined 15-year-old girl. Unlike many of her peers who joined the dojo for fun or to impress their friends, Emily had a deeper reason for being there. Her grandfather, whom she adored, had been a martial artist in his younger days. He often told her stories about his adventures in tournaments and his encounters with some of the greatest fighters of his time. Though he passed away when Emily was just 10, his legacy lived on through her. She carried his old training gear, a worn-out GI and a faded black belt, and she trained hard, hoping to make him proud. Emily rarely spoke about her grandfather during class, but when she did, her eyes sparkled with admiration. One day, while stretching before practice, she casually mentioned that her grandfather had once sparred with Bruce Lee. At first, no one paid much attention. After all, teenagers sometimes exaggerated things, especially in environments like this where everyone wanted to prove themselves. But as Emily continued talking, a few students began to listen more closely. He wasn't just any fighter, Emily said softly, her voice tinged with pride. He won championships you've probably never heard of. And he always said the key to winning wasn't strength, it was respect for your opponent. Her words caught the ear of Coach Harris, who was standing nearby, observing his students. Coach Harris was known for his tough demeanor and unyielding discipline. To him, martial arts was not just about self-defense or fitness. It was a way of life built on rigor and humility. Over the years, he had grown increasingly frustrated with what he called the Instagram generation, kids who came to the dojo expecting quick results without putting in the work. So when he overheard Emily's claim, something inside him snapped. "Excuse me," Coach Harris barked, striding toward her. His voice echoed across the room, silencing the chatter. "What did you just say?" Emily froze, startled by his sudden focus on her. I was just saying my grandpa used to compete in tournaments. He even fought against Bruce Lee once." Coach Harris crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "Bruce Lee? Really? You expect us to believe that?" The other students stopped what they were doing, sensing the tension in the air. Some exchanged nervous glances, while others leaned forward, eager to see how this would play out. Emily felt her cheeks grow warm, but she didn't back down. "It's true," she insisted. "My grandpa told me himself." Coach Harris let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You know, Emily, I've heard a lot of tall tales in my time, but this takes the cake. If your grandfather was such a big deal, why haven't we ever heard of him? Why don't you show us some of those championship moves he taught you?" Emily opened her mouth to reply, but before she could speak, Coach Harris cut her off. "No, wait, let me guess. He only taught you how to talk like a champion, right?" A few students chuckled nervously, though most remained silent. Emily clenched her fists, trying to keep her composure. She hated being mocked, especially when it came to her grandfather. "He taught me plenty," she shot back, her voice trembling, slightly. "But I don't need to prove anything to you." That seemed to infuriate Coach Harris even more. He stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "Oh, really? Because it sounds like you're full of excuses. Maybe if you spent less time bragging and more time training, you'd actually have something to show for it." The room was completely still now, every pair of eyes glued to the confrontation unfolding between coach and student. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Just as she opened her mouth to defend herself again, Coach Harris raised his hand and delivered a sharp slap to her cheek. The sound was like a crack of thunder, reverberating through the dojo. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Emily staggered backward, her hand flying to her face. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her vision blurred as tears spilled onto her cheeks. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Neither could anyone else. Before anyone could react, the door to the dojo creaked open. Everyone turned to see who it was, their jaws dropping in disbelief. Standing in the doorway, framed by the soft glow of the setting sun, was a man whose presence commanded instant awe. It was none other than Chuck Norris, the legendary martial artist, actor, and cultural icon. Clad in a simple jacket and jeans, he looked almost ordinary, yet there was an undeniable aura of authority about him. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Then, with calm curiosity, Chuck Norris stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His piercing gaze swept across the room, taking in the stunned faces of the students and the unmistakable tension hanging in the air. Finally, his eyes landed on Emily, whose tear-streaked face made it clear that something serious had just occurred. "What's going on here?" Norris asked, his voice steady and measured. No one answered immediately. Coach Harris, realizing the gravity of the situation, shifted uncomfortably on his feet. Emily, still reeling from the slap, hesitated to speak. But then, summoning every ounce of courage she had, she took a deep breath and began to explain. And as she spoke, the story of her grandfather and the injustice she had just endured unfolded in front of one of the most revered figures in martial arts history. The room was frozen in silence, the kind of stillness that feels heavy and suffocating. All eyes were on Chuck Norris as he stood near the doorway, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm of emotions swirling around him. Emily, her face, flushed with embarrassment and streaked with tears, stood motionless, unsure of what to do next. Coach Harris, on the other hand, looked like a deer caught in headlights. His earlier bravado had evaporated the moment Norris walked in. "What's going on here?" Norris repeated, his voice firm but not unkind. The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. For a few seconds, no one spoke. The students glanced nervously at each other, waiting for someone else to break the tension. Finally, Emily took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped away her tears. It's about my grandfather," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, glancing at Coach Harris, who avoided her gaze entirely. Norris nodded encouragingly, signaling for her to continue. "My grandpa was a martial artist. He competed in tournaments when he was younger, and he even sparred with some really famous fighters. But Coach Harris didn't believe me when I told everyone. He said I was lying." Norris tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful. "And why would he think that?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. Because no one's ever heard of my grandpa. Coach Harris said if he was such a great fighter, we'd all know about him. And then..." Her voice cracked, and she paused to steady herself. "Then he slapped me." A collective gasp rippled through the room, though most of the students already knew what had happened. They had witnessed it firsthand, their shock turning into discomfort as they watched Coach Harris lose control. Now, with Chuck Norris standing there, the gravity of the situation became painfully clear. No one dared to look directly at Coach Harris, whose face had turned a deep shade of red. Norris's eyes shifted to the coach, who was now fidgeting uncomfortably. "Is this true?" Norris asked, his tone neutral but probing. Coach Harris cleared his throat, struggling to find the right words. I may have overreacted," he admitted reluctantly. But she was bragging, making wild claims about her grandfather fighting Bruce Lee and being some kind of world champion. It sounded ridiculous. I thought she needed to be brought down. "A peg or two." Norris raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by the explanation. "So you decided to slap her? To teach her humility?" "Well, yes, no, I mean," Coach Harris stammered, his confidence crumbling under Norris's unwavering gaze. "It wasn't supposed to be harsh, just a little tap to get her attention." "A slap is a slap," Norris interjected, his voice sharper now. "And violence isn't the way to resolve disagreements, especially not in a dojo. This is supposed to be a place of learning and respect, isn't it?" Coach Harris opened his mouth to argue, but quickly closed it again. He knew Norris was right, and the weight of his mistake pressed down on him like a boulder. The students, too, seemed to shrink under the legendary martial artist's disapproving stare. Some looked guilty, while others appeared relieved that someone had finally called out their coach's behavior. Emily, sensing the shift in the room, found the courage to speak again. "My grandpa wasn't just any fighter," she said, her voice stronger this time. "He worked hard for everything he achieved. He never bragged about it, but he taught me so much about martial arts and about life. I wasn't trying to show off. I just wanted people to know where I come from." Norris nodded slowly, his expression softening. "That's admirable," he said. "Respecting your roots and honoring the people who shaped you is one of the most important things you can do. But let me ask you something, Emily. Do you believe those stories yourself? Or are you just repeating what you've been told?" Emily blinked, surprised by the question. She hadn't expected Norris to challenge her like that. After a brief pause, she answered honestly, "I believe them because they're part of who I am. My grandpa wasn't perfect, but he was a good man. He believed in discipline, respect, and kindness. Those are the lessons I carry with me every day." Norris smiled faintly, clearly impressed by her response. Then he turned back to Coach Harris, who was now sweating profusely. "You see, Harris," Norris said, addressing the coach directly, "the problem here isn't whether Emily's grandfather was a world champion or not. The problem is that you dismissed her outright without giving her a chance to prove herself. Martial arts isn't just about physical strength, it's about character. And slapping a student for any reason isn't going to build character. It's going to destroy trust." Coach Harris looked down at the floor, unable to meet Norris's eyes. "You're absolutely right," he muttered. "I messed up. I let my frustration get the better of me, and I crossed a line. I'm sorry, Emily." The apology came out awkwardly, but it was genuine. Emily nodded silently, accepting it without hesitation. She didn't want to hold a grudge, she just wanted to move past the incident and focus on her training. Still, Norris wasn't done yet. "An apology is a good start," he said. "But actions speak louder than words. If you truly regret what happened, you need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Not to Emily, and not to anyone else in this dojo. Respect is the foundation of martial arts. Without it, everything else falls apart." The students murmured in agreement, nodding their heads. Even Coach Harris seemed to understand the depth of Norris's words. For years, he had prided himself on running a disciplined dojo, but now he realized that discipline without compassion was meaningless. He resolved to change his approach, vowing to treat his students with the respect they deserved. As the tension in the room began to ease, Norris turned his attention back to Emily. "Now," he said with a warm smile, "tell me more about your grandfather. What made him special?" Emily hesitated for a moment, then launched into a heartfelt description of her grandfather's life and achievements. She talked about his dedication to martial arts, his humility despite his success, and the values he instilled in her. As she spoke, Norris listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking follow-up questions. By the time she finished, the entire class was captivated, not just by her story, but by the passion and sincerity in her voice. When Emily finally fell silent, Norris leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said after a pause, "there's a reason why legends like Bruce Lee are remembered long after they're gone. It's not just because of their skills, it's because of the impact they had on the people around them. Your grandfather sounds like one of those rare individuals who inspired others to be better versions of themselves. That's a legacy worth celebrating." Emily beamed, her earlier sadness replaced by pride and gratitude. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt truly seen and understood. And as she glanced around the room, she noticed something remarkable. Her classmates were looking at her differently now. Gone was the skepticism and mockery. In its place was a newfound respect. Chuck Norris's presence had transformed the atmosphere of the dojo. What had started as a humiliating ordeal for Emily had become an opportunity for growth, not just for her, but for everyone involved. As Norris prepared to leave, he offered one final piece of advice to the group. "Remember," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority, "the greatest victories in life aren't won with fists. They're won with heart. Keep that in mind, and you'll go far." With that, He stepped out of the dojo, leaving behind a room full of inspired students and a coach determined to change for the better. As Chuck Norris prepared to leave the dojo, Emily's heart raced with a mix of emotions. She couldn't believe that one of her grandfather's idols was standing right in front of her, listening to her story and treating her with kindness. But before Norris could step out the door, something inside him seemed to pause. He turned back toward the group, his piercing gaze scanning the room once more. "You know," he said, his tone thoughtful but firm. "There's something else I want to address before I go." The student straightened up instinctively, sensing that this wasn't just casual advice. It was important. Even Coach Harris, who had been quietly retreating to the corner of the room, perked up, his earlier shame replaced by curiosity. Norris continued. "Emily mentioned that her grandfather sparred with Bruce Lee. Now, as someone who has had the privilege of meeting Bruce and many other great martial artists, I can tell you that legends like him don't just appear out of nowhere. They're shaped by the people around them, their teachers, their opponents, their peers. And sometimes those people remain unsung heroes." The room fell silent again, everyone hanging on his every word. Norris's voice carried a weight that demanded attention, and no one dared to interrupt. He walked slowly across the dojo floor, his steps deliberate and measured, as if he were pacing through memories. "I'll never forget the first time I heard about Emily's grandfather," Norris began, surprising everyone, including Emily herself. Her eyes widened and she took a hesitant step forward. "Wait, you knew my grandpa?" she asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Norris smiled faintly, nodding. "I did. His name was Daniel Carter, right?" "Yes," Emily exclaimed, her face lighting up with excitement. "That's him. Did you really know him?" "I didn't just know him," Norris replied, his expression softening. "I competed against him. In fact," he paused for dramatic effect, glancing at the students who were now leaning forward in anticipation, "I lost to him." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Coach Harris, who had been trying to fade into the background, looked stunned. Losing a match wasn't something Chuck Norris talked about often, if ever. For him to admit it so openly was almost unheard of. "Your grandfather was an incredible fighter," Norris continued, addressing Emily directly. "He wasn't flashy or boastful like some of the others. He let his skills speak for themselves. That tournament we fought in, it was brutal. I gave it everything I had, but your grandpa, he was relentless. He moved with precision, grace, and respect. By the end of the match, I knew I'd been beaten fair and square." Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of pride. She had always known her grandfather was talented, but hearing it from someone like Chuck Norris made it feel real in a way she hadn't expected. The other students exchanged awestruck glances, their earlier skepticism melting away completely. Coach Harris, however, looked increasingly uneasy. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his jaw was clenched. It was clear he hadn't anticipated this turn of events. Norris noticed his discomfort and decided to address it head-on. "Harris," Norris said, turning to the coach, "you questioned Emily's claims because you thought they sounded far-fetched. But here's the thing. Just because you haven't heard of someone doesn't mean they didn't exist. Martial arts history is filled with unsung heroes, men and women who poured their hearts into their craft without seeking fame or recognition. Daniel Carter was one of those people." Coach Harris nodded reluctantly, his shoulders slumping under the weight of Norris's words. "You're absolutely right," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I jumped to conclusions, and I disrespected not only Emily but also her grandfather's memory. I won't make excuses for what I did. I was wrong." Norris studied him for a moment, then gave a slight nod of approval. "Apologizing takes courage," he said. "But remember, actions matter more than words. If you truly regret what happened, prove it by fostering a culture of respect in this dojo. Encourage your students to honor their roots, whether those roots are famous or obscure. Teach them that martial arts isn't just about winning. It's about growing as individuals." The coach swallowed hard, visibly moved by the advice. Thank You, Mr. Norris, he said sincerely. I promise to do better. With that settled, Norris returned his focus to Emily. Now, Emily, he said warmly, since we've established that your grandfather was the real deal, why don't you show us something he taught you? A technique, a stance, anything that reminds you of him. Emily hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious. She had spent years practicing the moves her grandfather had shown her, but performing them in front of Chuck Norris felt surreal. Still, she didn't want to pass up the opportunity. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the mat and assumed a fighting stance, one of the first techniques her grandfather had ever taught her. Good form, Norris commented approvingly. What's the philosophy behind it? Emily relaxed, slightly grateful for the encouragement. My grandpa always said that balance is key, she explained. If your body is balanced, your mind will follow. And if both are balanced, you can handle anything life throws at you. Norris nodded, clearly impressed. That's wisdom right there, he said. Show me another move. Over the next few minutes, Emily demonstrated several techniques her grandfather had drilled into her. A swift roundhouse kick, a precise block, and a fluid transition between stances. Each movement was executed with care and precision, reflecting the countless hours she had spent honing her skills. As she moved, Norris watched intently, occasionally offering tips or asking questions to deepen her understanding. The other students gathered around, forming a loose circle. Some clapped softly after each demonstration, while others whispered among themselves, marveling at how much they had underestimated Emily. Even Coach Harris joined the group, watching with newfound admiration as Emily proved herself, not through boasts or bravado, but through sheer dedication and skill. When Emily finished, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the kind of polite clapping reserved for formal performances. It was genuine, heartfelt praise from people who now saw her in a completely different light. Emily blushed, unused to being the center of attention, but she couldn't help smiling. Well done, Norris said, stepping forward to shake her hand. Your grandfather would be proud of you. Keep training, keep learning, and most importantly, keep honoring his legacy. Emily nodded, overwhelmed with gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Norris, she said softly. This means so much to me. As Norris prepared to leave for the second time, he addressed the entire class one last time. Remember this moment, he told them. Remember how easy it is to dismiss someone based on assumptions, or how powerful it can be to give them a chance. Martial arts is about more than punches and kicks. It's about growth, humility, and respect. Carry those values with you, and you'll inspire others just like Emily has inspired all of us today. With that, Chuck Norris turned and walked out of the dojo, leaving behind a room full of inspired students, a humbled coach, and a young girl whose confidence had soared to new heights. The moment Chuck Norris left the dojo, the room buzzed with energy. It wasn't the usual chatter of students comparing techniques or joking around. It was something deeper, more meaningful. The air felt charged with a sense of renewal and possibility. Emily stood at the center of it all, still glowing from Norris's encouragement and validation. For years, she had carried her grandfather's legacy quietly, unsure if anyone would ever believe her stories. Now, thanks to Norris's intervention, that legacy had been brought to life in front of everyone. Coach Harris, who had spent most of his career commanding respect through strict discipline, found himself grappling with a new perspective. He had always believed that toughness was the key to success in martial arts, but seeing how Norris handled the situation, and hearing him emphasize values like humility, respect, and patience, made Harris realize just how narrow his approach had been. As he watched Emily interact with her classmates, now eager to ask her questions about her grandfather's techniques, he couldn't help but feel a pang of regret for dismissing her earlier. Emily, Harris called out, his voice softer than usual. She turned toward him, her expression cautious but open. Can we talk for a moment? She nodded and followed him to a quiet corner of the dojo, away from the others. Coach Harris took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly together as if trying to steady himself. I owe you an apology, not just for slapping you, but for doubting your grandfather's achievements. I let my own biases cloud my judgment and I treated you unfairly. That won't happen again. Emily studied him, for a moment searching for sincerity in his eyes. What she saw surprised her. Genuine remorse. Thank you, Coach, she said finally. It means a lot to hear you say that. Harris nodded, visibly relieved. Your grandfather sounds like he was an extraordinary man, and based on what I've seen tonight, you're following in his footsteps. Keep pushing yourself. You have real potential. For the first time since joining the dojo, Emily felt truly seen by her coach. His words weren't just an apology. They were an acknowledgement of her hard work and dedication. She smiled faintly, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. I will, she promised. Meanwhile, the other students were buzzing with excitement. Some gathered around Emily, peppering her with questions about her grandfather's training methods and tournament experiences. Others whispered among themselves, marveling at the fact that Chuck Norris had actually walked into their dojo, and not only that, but he had taken the time to validate one of their own. Did you know Bruce Lee personally? Asked Jake, one of the older students, his tone laced with awe. Emily shook her head. No, my grandpa never introduced me to him, but he used to tell me stories about their sparring matches. He said Bruce Lee was fast like lightning, but what impressed him most was how humble Bruce was, even when he won. That's amazing. Another student chimed in. Do you think your grandpa could have beaten him? Emily laughed softly. My grandpa always said winning wasn't the point. It was about learning from each fight and growing stronger, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually too. Her answer earned nods of approval from the group. They had grown up idolizing fighters known for their flashy moves and larger-than-life personas, but Emily's perspective offered something different, a reminder that true strength came from within. As the conversation continued, Coach Harris returned to the group, clearing his throat to get everyone's attention. Listen up, he began, his voice firm but kinder than usual. Tonight has been eye-opening for all of us. Thanks to Mr. Norris, we've learned some valuable lessons about respect, humility, and the importance of giving people a chance to prove themselves. He paused, glancing at Emily before continuing. From now on, this dojo is going to operate differently. We'll still train hard, but we'll also focus on building each other up instead of tearing each other down. I want every one of you to leave here not just as better fighters, but as better people. The students exchanged surprised looks. This was a side of Coach Harris they hadn't seen before, one that prioritized growth over intimidation. Several of them clapped in approval, while others simply nodded, clearly moved by his words. Later that evening, after the class had ended and the students had gone home, Emily stayed behind to clean up the mats. It was a habit she'd picked up from her grandfather, who always stressed the importance of taking care of your surroundings. As she worked, she reflected on everything that had happened. Her mind kept returning to Chuck Norris's story about losing to her grandfather. The image of Norris admitting defeat to Daniel Carter filled her with pride, but also with responsibility. She realized that carrying her grandfather's legacy wasn't just about honoring his memory, it was about living up to the values he had instilled in her. Just as she finished tidying up, Coach Harris approached her once more. In his hands, he held a small wooden plaque engraved with the words, respect, discipline, integrity. It was an award he had given to top students in the past, though Emily had never expected to receive it herself. I know it's late, Harris said, handing her the plaque, but I wanted you to have this. You've shown incredible strength and character today, not just during your demonstration, but in how you handled adversity. Your grandfather would be proud. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she accepted the plaque. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface, tracing the engraved words. Thank you, Coach, she whispered. This means so much to me. Harris smiled faintly, then added, and hey, if you ever want to share more stories about your grandpa, I'd love to hear them. Maybe I can learn a thing or two. Emily grinned, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider in the dojo. Instead, she felt like part of a community, one that valued her contributions, and respected her heritage. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about how quickly things had changed. Just hours ago, she had been humiliated and doubted, her claims dismissed without a second thought. Now she was surrounded by people who believed in her, and a coach who was determined to make amends. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, both in her training and in life. But she also knew that she had the tools to face them: her grandfather's teachings, Chuck Norris's wisdom, and the support of those around her. Before drifting off to sleep, she made a silent promise to herself and to her grandfather. She would continue to train hard, to honor his legacy, and to inspire others the way he had inspired her. Because in the end, that was what martial arts was all about. Not just mastering techniques, but becoming the best version of yourself. The days following Chuck Norris's visit to the dojo felt like a turning point for everyone involved. The atmosphere in the Harris Karate Dojo shifted noticeably, as if a fresh breeze had swept through its walls, clearing out years of rigid discipline and replacing it with something softer but equally powerful: respect. Coach Harris, who had always prided himself on running a strict and orderly school, made good on his promise to change. He began each class with a short reflection, a moment where students could share personal stories or talk about what martial arts meant to them. It was an idea inspired by Emily's courage to speak about her grandfather, and it quickly became one of the most anticipated parts of practice. For Emily, this newfound openness brought both excitement and responsibility. She found herself at the center of attention more often than not, with classmates asking her questions about her grandfather's philosophy and techniques. At first, she worried that sharing so much might make her seem boastful, but soon she realized it wasn't about bragging. It was about connection. Her grandfather's teachings resonated deeply with many of the students, especially those who struggled with self-doubt or frustration. They saw in her story a reminder that progress comes not from perfection, but from perseverance. Coach Harris also took steps to ensure no student ever felt dismissed or humiliated again. Gone were the sharp reprimands and public shaming that used to define his teaching style. Instead, he focused on guiding his students with patience and encouragement. If someone made a mistake during training, he would pull them aside privately, to offer constructive feedback rather than calling them out in front of the group. This subtle yet significant shift earned him a new level of trust among the students, including Emily. One evening, after a particularly intense sparring session, Coach Harris gathered everyone into a circle. "All right, listen up," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "We've been working hard lately, and I'm proud of how far you've all come. But tonight, I want us to focus on something different, something Mr. Norris reminded me of when he visited." He paused, glancing around the circle before continuing. "Martial arts isn't just about physical strength or winning matches. It's about character. It's about becoming better versions of ourselves, not just in here but out there." He gestured toward the world beyond the dojo walls. "So let's take a moment to reflect. What does martial arts mean to you? How has it changed your life?" The room fell silent as the students considered his question. After a few moments, Jake, one of the older students, raised his hand hesitantly. "To me, martial arts is about control," he said. "Not just controlling my body, but controlling my emotions too. Like, when I get angry or upset, I try to channel that energy into something productive instead of letting it take over." Coach Harris nodded approvingly. "That's a great insight, Jake. Anyone else?" Several hands went up, and the discussion flowed naturally from there. One girl talked about how martial arts had helped her overcome anxiety, while another boy shared how it gave him confidence to stand up for himself at school. When it was Emily's turn, she spoke thoughtfully about her grandfather's belief in balance, both physically and mentally. "He used to say that if your mind is balanced, your body will follow," she explained. "And if both are balanced, you can handle anything." Her words resonated deeply with the group, sparking nods of agreement and quiet murmurs of admiration. Even Coach Harris looked moved, jotting down notes in his journal as if to remember her grandfather's wisdom for future lessons. As the weeks turned into months, Emily continued to grow stronger, not just in skill, but in spirit. Her classmates, once skeptical of her claims, now treated her with genuine respect. Some even started referring to her as Sensei Carter in jest, though the nickname stuck because it fit. She became a mentor to younger students, patiently helping them master basic stances and blocks while sharing stories about her grandfather's unconventional methods. One day, during a break between drills, Emily noticed Coach Harris watching her closely. When she caught his eye, he motioned for her to join him near the wall. "I've been thinking," he began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "You've got a real gift for teaching, Emily. Have you ever considered helping out with the beginner classes?" Emily blinked in surprise. Teaching had never crossed her mind before, but the idea intrigued her. "Do you really think I'm ready for that?" she asked uncertainly. "Absolutely," Harris replied without hesitation. "You have a way of connecting with people, of making them feel seen and valued. That's rare, especially in someone your age. Plus, your grandfather's techniques are unique. Sharing them could inspire others in ways we haven't even imagined yet." Flattered but slightly overwhelmed, Emily agreed to give it a try. Over the next few weeks, she began assisting Coach Harris with the younger students, demonstrating moves and offering guidance. To her delight, the kids responded enthusiastically, their eyes lighting up whenever she shared a story about her grandfather. One little boy, barely 8 years old, approached her after class one day with a shy smile. "Miss Emily, do you think I'll ever be as good as your grandpa?" he asked. Emily knelt down to meet his gaze, her heart swelling with affection. "Of course you can," she told him earnestly. "But remember, being good isn't about winning trophies or beating people. It's about working hard, staying humble, and treating others with kindness. If you do that, you'll already be better than most." The boy beamed, nodding eagerly. Watching him run off to tell his friends what she'd said, Emily felt a profound sense of fulfillment. For the first time, she understood the true impact of her grandfather's legacy, not just on her own life, but on the lives of those around her. Meanwhile, Coach Harris continued to evolve as an instructor. He implemented new practices inspired by Emily's grandfather's philosophy, such as pairing advanced students with beginners for partner drills. This not only fostered camaraderie, but also reinforced the importance of teamwork and mutual support. He also introduced weekly discussions where students could reflect on their progress and set goals for themselves, emphasizing that growth wasn't measured solely by belts or tournament wins, but by inner transformation. One evening, after dismissing the class, Coach Harris pulled Emily aside once more. "I wanted to thank you," he said sincerely. "You've taught me things I didn't know I needed to learn. Your grandfather's values. They're shaping this dojo in ways I couldn't have imagined." Emily smiled warmly, touched by his gratitude. "My grandpa always believed that martial arts should bring people together," she replied. "I think he'd be happy to see how much this place has changed." Harris nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Well, whatever happens next, I'm glad we're building something meaningful here. Something that honors not just technique, but heart." As they parted ways for the night, Emily felt a deep sense of pride, not just in herself, but in the community they were creating together. The slap that had once humiliated her had become a catalyst for change, transforming not only her relationship with Coach Harris, but also the entire culture of the dojo. And as she walked home under the starlit sky, she knew one thing for certain. Her grandfather's legacy would continue to live on, not just in her, but in every person whose life she touched. Years passed since that fateful evening when Chuck Norris walked into the Harris Karate Dojo and changed everything. Emily, who had once been a shy teenager struggling to prove herself, was now a confident young woman with accomplishments that would have made her grandfather proud. The dojo itself had transformed into something far greater than anyone could have imagined, a thriving hub of learning, respect, and community. What started as a small-town martial arts school had grown into a place where people of all ages and backgrounds came not just to train but to grow as individuals. Emily's role in the dojo had evolved dramatically over time. From assisting Coach Harris with beginner classes, she eventually became an official instructor, earning the title of sensei at the age of 21. It wasn't just her technical skill that earned her this honor, it was her ability to inspire others. Her grandfather's teachings remained at the core of her approach, blending discipline with compassion and challenge with encouragement. She often reminded her students that martial arts was about more than physical strength. It was about finding balance within themselves and using their skills to uplift others. One of the most remarkable changes in the dojo was how Coach Harris embraced his own transformation. Once known for his stern demeanor and rigid rules, he now embodied the values he had once struggled to understand. He worked closely with Emily, learning from her insights and incorporating them into his teaching methods. Together, they created a curriculum that emphasized not only technique but also character development. They introduced storytelling sessions, where senior students shared personal experiences, helping newer members see the broader purpose of their training. These sessions became a cornerstone of the dojo's culture, fostering deeper connections among its members. As word spread about the unique environment at the Harris Karate Dojo, enrollment soared. People traveled from neighboring towns, and even other states, to train under Emily and Coach Harris. Some were drawn by the reputation of excellence, while others sought refuge from challenging circumstances. For many, the dojo became a second home, a safe space where they felt accepted and supported. A young boy named Liam, who had been bullied at school, found solace in the discipline and camaraderie of the dojo. Under Emily's guidance, he learned to stand up for himself without resorting to aggression, embodying the very principles her grandfather had taught her. But perhaps the most significant impact of Emily's journey was the way she kept her grandfather's legacy alive. Determined to ensure his story wouldn't fade into obscurity, she began documenting his life and achievements. With help from Coach Harris and some of the senior students, she organized interviews with former competitors and colleagues of her grandfather, piecing together a rich tapestry of memories and anecdotes. She discovered stories she'd never heard before, like the time Daniel Carter donated his tournament winnings to build a community center in a struggling neighborhood, or how he mentored countless young fighters who went on to achieve greatness themselves. These stories inspired Emily to write a book titled The Quiet Champion: Lessons from My Grandfather. The book combined her personal reflections with historical accounts, offering readers a glimpse into the world of martial arts through the lens of humility, perseverance, and kindness. When it was published, it quickly gained popularity, resonating with both martial artists and non-practitioners alike. Critics praised Emily for capturing the essence of what made her grandfather extraordinary, not his victories, but his humanity. The success of the book brought unexpected opportunities. Emily was invited to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing her grandfather's philosophy with audiences around the country. She also launched a podcast called Legacy Through Action, where she interviewed influential figures in martial arts, sports, and beyond, exploring how they carried forward the legacies of those who shaped them. Each episode ended with a simple, yet powerful message: honor your roots, but don't be afraid to forge your own path. Despite her growing fame, Emily remained grounded, always prioritizing her work at the dojo. She believed that true success wasn't measured by accolades or recognition, but by the positive difference you made in people's lives. And every day, she saw evidence of that difference: the timid child who grew brave, the skeptical adult who found purpose, the fractured community that came together. These were the victories that mattered most. One crisp autumn afternoon, several years after Chuck Norris's visit, Emily stood outside the dojo, watching as a new group of students arrived for their first class. Among them was a teenage girl clutching a worn-out gi, her expression nervous but hopeful. As Emily greeted her, the girl hesitated before speaking. "I'm not sure if I belong here," she admitted softly. "My dad says I'll never be as, good as the others." Emily smiled gently, recognizing the same doubt she had once felt. "Let me tell you something," she said, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Martial arts isn't about being the best, it's about becoming the best version of yourself. You don't have to compare yourself to anyone else. Just show up, work hard, and trust the process." The girl nodded, her eyes brightening with determination. Watching her step inside, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. In that moment, she realized how far she had come, not just as a martial artist, but as a person. The slap that had once humiliated her had set off a chain reaction, leading her to discover her strength, embrace her heritage, and inspire others. Later, that evening, as Emily reflected on the day's events, she received an email notification on her phone. It was from Chuck Norris himself. Curious, she opened it and read, "Dear Emily, I recently came across your book and wanted to congratulate you on such a beautiful tribute to your grandfather. His spirit lives on through you, and I'm honored to have played a small part in your journey. Keep shining your light. It's making the world a better place. With admiration, Chuck Norris." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she reread the message. It was a reminder that the ripple effects of kindness and respect could reach farther than anyone imagined. That single act of validation from Norris years ago had sparked a movement, a shift in perspective that touched countless lives, including her own. As she turned off her phone and gazed out at the stars, Emily whispered a silent thank you to her grandfather, to Chuck Norris, and to everyone who had supported her along the way. She knew her journey was far from over, but she also knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, carrying forward a legacy of love, resilience, and unwavering belief in the power of human potential.